The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that makes your heart pound a little harder, your breath slow just a bit. All eyes were on the woman standing before the judge, her hands clasped, her voice steady, but her eyes held something deeper. Regret? Strength? Maybe both. She was a black woman in her mid-30s, dressed simply but neatly, standing in the center of the room. The charges against her had already been read. The evidence was there. Everyone knew what was coming next. But then she did something that no one expected. She took a deep breath, looked straight at the judge, and said, "I'm guilty." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, a few gasps, a shifting of seats. Even the prosecutor raised an eyebrow. People had seen defendants plead guilty before, sure. But something about the way she said it was different. It wasn't just a confession. It was a statement, a decision. The judge, an older man with years of experience, sat back in his chair. He studied her for a long moment. His expression didn't change, but those who knew him could tell something was happening in his mind. A thought, a question, maybe even doubt. This was the moment where most cases took a predictable turn. The judge would nod, confirm the plea, and sentencing would follow. Simple, routine, expected. But that's not what happened. Instead, the judge did something that left the entire room in shock. The attorneys froze. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Even the woman who had walked in prepared to accept her fate looked up with confusion in her eyes. Because whatever anyone thought would happen next, they were wrong. And trust me, you won't see this twist coming. The judge leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk in front of him. His eyes locked onto hers, searching for something. The courtroom was still, the air thick with tension. No one dared to move, not even the bailiff. It was as if time had paused, waiting for his next words. "You're guilty," he finally said, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, Your Honor," she answered, her voice steady. "Why?" The question hung in the air. It wasn't the standard legal response. It wasn't procedural. It was personal. The kind of question that demanded more than just a yes or no. She hesitated just for a second, her fingers tightening together. The room felt smaller now, like everyone had moved in closer, waiting for her answer. "Because I did it," she finally said. But there was something in her voice, something just beneath the surface. Oh wait, a story left untold. The judge exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. The attorneys exchanged glances. Even the court clerk, who had seen countless cases, looked up from her paperwork. This wasn't normal. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, given the defendant's admission, I believe we should proceed with sentencing." His voice was sharp, businesslike. He was ready to move on, ready to close the case. But the judge didn't respond, not yet. He tapped his fingers against the desk, his expression unreadable. Then finally he spoke. "I'm not ready to sentence you." Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor stiffened. The woman's eyes widened, confusion flickering across her face. No one understood what was happening. But one thing was clear. This case was far from over. A wave of confusion spread through the courtroom. The judge's words didn't make sense. This was supposed to be open and shut. A guilty plea meant sentencing, no delays, no questions. But now everything felt uncertain, like the ground beneath them had shifted. The prosecutor stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the defendant has admitted to the charges. There's nothing more to discuss." The judge turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "There's always more to discuss," he said, his voice calm but firm. He looked back at the woman. "Tell me in your own words, why did you do it?" She blinked as if caught off guard. "I already said. I'm guilty." "That's not what I asked." Silence stretched between them. A few people in the gallery leaned forward. Something wasn't adding up, and the judge knew it. She swallowed, her eyes flickering toward the prosecutor, then to the small group of people watching from the back row. There was someone there, an older woman, her face tight with worry. Their eyes met for the briefest moment before she looked away. The judge noticed. He noticed everything. "Miss Carter," he said, using her last name for the first time. "The law may deal in facts, but justice deals in truth." He paused. "I don't think we've heard the full truth yet." The tension in the room deepened. The prosecutor clenched his jaw. The defense attorney, who had been unusually quiet, finally shifted in his chair, glancing at his client. "Your Honor," he spoke up, his tone careful. "If you're questioning her plea, we can." "I'm questioning a lot of things," the judge interrupted, "and before I make any decisions, I want answers." Miss Carter's hands tightened into fists. A storm flickered in her eyes, emotions warring beneath the surface. "It doesn't matter," she said, almost too quietly. "It does," the judge replied, "and it matters now more than ever." The older woman in the back row exhaled shakily. The prosecutor crossed his arms, clearly frustrated. The bailiff shifted on his feet. Nobody knew what was about to happen next, but one thing was certain. This case had just taken a turn no one saw coming. Miss Carter's breathing grew unsteady. She glanced at the judge, then at the older woman in the back row. Something in her face shifted, like a door cracking open just enough to let something out. But then, just as quickly, she shut it again. "I already told you everything you need to know," she said, her voice sharper now. "I did it. That's all that matters." The judge studied her carefully. "I don't believe that." The prosecutor exhaled in frustration. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we are wasting time." He turned to Ms. Carter. "If you're trying to change your plea—" "I'm not," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm guilty." "Then why do you look so afraid?" the judge asked. Her lips parted, but no words came. A flicker of something, hesitation, doubt, maybe even fear, flashed across her face. The older woman in the back row clutched her hands together, knuckles white. The judge shifted his attention to her. "Ma'am," he said, his tone softer but just as steady, "do you know the defendant?" The room tensed. Miss Carter turned sharply. "She has nothing to do with this." But the woman in the back hesitated. For a long moment she just sat there, her eyes locked onto Ms. Carter's. Then slowly she stood. The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken. Every eye was on her. "My name is Evelyn Carter," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I'm her mother." A murmur spread through the room. The prosecutor's brow furrowed. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably. The judge nodded slowly. "And you have something to say, Mrs. Carter?" The older woman swallowed hard, looking at her daughter with a mixture of sorrow and urgency. Miss Carter clenched her jaw, her eyes pleading. But it was too late. Mrs. Carter took a deep breath, and then she said something that made the entire courtroom freeze. "She's not guilty." The words crashed over the room like a wave. The prosecutor's mouth tightened. The defense attorney stiffened. The bailiff shot a glance toward the judge. Miss Carter closed her eyes for just a second, as if bracing herself for what was coming. And in that moment, everything changed. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Mrs. Carter's words hummed in the air, heavy and unshakable. Even the judge, who had been so measured, so composed, leaned forward slightly. Miss Carter's face darkened. "Mom," she whispered, shaking her head. "Don't." But her mother didn't back down. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the bench in front of her. "I can't stay quiet anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "Not when this isn't right." The prosecutor regained his composure first, straightening his tie. "Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, your daughter has already confessed. This case is not open for debate." The older woman turned to him, her expression fierce despite the fear in her eyes. "Confessed? Or took the blame?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Miss Carter squeezed her eyes shut, her body tense like a wire pulled too tight. The judge raised a hand, silencing the noise. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "are you saying your daughter didn't commit this crime?" Mrs. Carter hesitated for just a moment. Then she nodded. She didn't. The tension in the room doubled. The defense attorney, who had barely spoken through the hearing, finally leaned forward. "Your Honor," he said cautiously, "if there is reason to believe my client is not responsible." "I am responsible," Miss Carter cut in, her voice sharp. "I already told you." Mrs. Carter turned toward her daughter, her eyes filled with something deeper than just sorrow, something close to desperation. "You don't have to do this," she said. Miss Carter's hands clenched into fists. "Yes, I do." The judge studied them both, his mind clearly racing. Then he spoke, his voice firm. "Mrs. Carter, if you have information that contradicts this plea, I suggest you share it now." The older woman swallowed hard. Then, with a shaking breath, she finally said the words that shattered the courtroom. "She's protecting someone." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The prosecutor stiffened. The defense attorney turned to his client, eyes widening. Miss Carter looked away. The judge's expression darkened. "Who?" The question cut through the silence like a blade. Mrs. Carter hesitated, her gaze flickering back toward the people in the back row, the same group her daughter had looked at before. And then slowly, almost unwillingly, her eyes landed on someone. A man, seated quietly, watching. And suddenly, the weight of the case shifted entirely. All eyes turned toward the man sitting in the back row. He hadn't moved the entire time, but now, under the weight of the judge's gaze, he shifted slightly. His jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists on his lap. Miss Carter swallowed hard, her face unreadable. "No," she said quickly. "This has nothing to do with him." But it was too late. The judge saw it. The hesitation, the flicker of fear in her eyes, the way the man's shoulders tensed. The prosecutor was already flipping through his notes, his voice quick and sharp. "Your Honor, the only evidence we have points directly to Ms. Carter. There is no indication." "There's no indication," the judge interrupted, "because she never fought the charges." His eyes were still on the man in the back. "But I think we're about to learn why." The tension in the room was unbearable. Mrs. Carter clutched the bench in front of her, shaking her head. "Please," she whispered. The man in the back finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, but cold. "This is a mistake." The judge's expression didn't change. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, but then he lifted his chin. "Derek Owens." A ripple went through the courtroom. The name carried weight. Even the prosecutors sat up straighter. Derek Owens, a name that had been whispered in connection to trouble before. A name tied to things that never quite made it into an official report. The judge turned back to Ms. Carter. "Is that who you're protecting?" She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. The silence was an answer on its own. Mrs. Carter's voice broke. "Tell them, baby. Tell them the truth." Ms. Carter's lips pressed together. She looked at Derek, something unreadable in her eyes. Fear, anger, something deeper. "It's over," she said softly. Derek's face hardened, his fists clenched. For the first time, he looked like a man about to lose control. The bailiff took a cautious step closer. The prosecutor flipped through his files, scrambling. "Your Honor, if there is reason to believe." The judge held up a hand. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "I will ask you one last time. Did you commit this crime?" A long pause. Then finally she lifted her head. "No." The courtroom exploded. Gasps, voices, movement. The bailiff stepped forward. Derek shot to his feet. Mrs. Carter let out a sob, covering her mouth. The judge banged his gavel. "Order. Order in the court." But even as the room settled, Derek Owens didn't move. His jaw clenched. His eyes burned into Ms. Carter. She had broken her silence, and now there was no going back. The judge exhaled, looking at the prosecutor. "I suggest we reopen this case." And just like that, everything changed. The courtroom slowly settled, but the energy in the air remained thick with shock. Ms. Carter stood frozen, as if the weight of her own words had just hit her. She had carried this secret for so long, and now it was out. Derek Owens didn't sit back down. His eyes stayed locked on her, his body tense. But the judge was watching him now, too. So was the prosecutor. So was everyone. He had lost the control he once had. The judge turned to the prosecutor. "Given the new development, I believe an investigation into Mr. Owens is necessary." The prosecutor, still rattled, nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Honor. We'll need to re-examine all evidence and witness statements." For the first time, Ms. Carter allowed herself to breathe. Her mother reached for her, gripping her hand tightly, as if afraid to let go. "I thought you would never tell the truth," Mrs. Carter whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Ms. Carter swallowed. "I almost didn't." The judge looked at her, his expression softer now. "Ms. Carter, I don't know what led you to take responsibility for someone else's crime, but you should never have had to carry that burden." He paused. "Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth. And today, we found it." Derek's face darkened. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the bailiff took a step toward him, a silent warning. He wasn't in control anymore. The gavel struck one last time. Court is adjourned. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Ms. Carter stood still, letting the moment sink in. The weight on her shoulders, the guilt, the fear. It wasn't gone, but for the first time in a long time, it was lighter. Her mother squeezed her hand. "You're free now." Ms. Carter let out a shaky breath. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think I finally am." And as she walked out of that courtroom, the past behind her, the future uncertain but hers to claim, one thing was clear. Her story wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about courage. The courage to finally speak the truth.